The Breede Valley Municipality is one of more than 250 local authorities in South Africa. It is located in the Western Cape Province, about 1 hour from the city of Cape Town. The regional centre is the town of Worcester, and the area's main economic driver is its well-established agricultural sector. Its fertile valleys and Mediterranean climate have enabled the development of a highly competitive commercial agricultural sector, primarily focused on exporting table grapes and other fruit and wine, as well as the production of broiler chickens, vegetables and dairy products for the local market. A diverse range of food products are produced, including berries, figs, kiwi and pome fruit, citrus, olives, butternuts, onions and onion seed, poultry, pork and dairy products. At the same time, the population of the Breede Valley Municipality face challenges such as persistent food insecurity, child malnutrition, unemployment and poverty. Climate change is an additional threat to the regional food system and the livelihoods generated within the region. The area is already experiencing unseasonal rainfall, flooding, heat waves and bushfires. At the same time, climate change may open up opportunities for new crops, production methods and activities to mitigate, adapt and build resilience. For these reasons, the Breede Valley Municipality, or BVM, was chosen as a pilot site by researchers from South Africa's DSI-NRF Centre of Excellence in Food Security at the University of the Western Cape, the French Agricultural Research Centre for International Development, also known as CRAD, and Freya University Amsterdam. The project, known as Urban FOSC, was funded by the European Research Area Network Co-Fund, ERA-Net Co-Fund, Food Systems and Climate (FOSC), and the South African National Research Foundation. Building on research that began in 2019, the research team and local stakeholders have been conducting a comprehensive study on urban food system resilience under climate change.
South Africa is unusual in the world in that we face what we've been talking about as a food system paradox. We're able to produce and process more food than the country actually needs. We are a world leader in the exports of fruits, many of which come from the Breede Valley, as well as many other crops which we export. We're able to produce sufficient healthy food for our population, and yet we have very poor food system outcomes. We continue to have very high levels of under 5 stunting. This is a measure of acute malnutrition. At the same time, we have very high levels of overweight and obesity, where poor people are eating foods which are energy dense but nutrient insufficient. And that means then we have diet-related non-communicable disease, like diabetes or hypertension. And then lastly, we're facing a crisis of climate change. This means higher temperatures, unpredictable rainfalls, flooding, as well as other kinds of events.
The Breede Valley Municipality is a microcosm of what's happening in food systems more broadly, and for this reason was chosen as a research site for the Urban FOSC project. Urban FOSC covers 2 other regions in Africa, Nakuru in the Nile Rift Valley in Kenya and Constantine in Algeria.
Urban FOSC is a research project, and we want to explore the potential impacts of climate change on the food system. We decided to select a number of countries to explore, to understand this food system, and these countries are three countries. So the first one is South Africa, the second one is Algeria, and the third one is Kenya. And for each of these countries, we decided to target secondary cities because we thought that in these types of cities, there are many challenges with a growing population. So in South Africa in particular, we selected Worcester, which is a small town in the Western Cape province. And in this area, we are trying to understand how the food system is functioning.
Typically, a food system has several major drivers, which are external to the system. In a place like Worcester and the smaller towns of Towes River, Dodoens and Rawsonville, a driver might be population increase, where there's in-migration from other parts of South Africa, as well as from other countries in Africa. Population change also affects the food system. South Africa has a young population, but unlike other African countries, we are also starting to see an aging population. These kinds of changes in the population change food patterns. It also changes how people relate to the food system. History is also a driver, and Worcester has a very rich history, dating back centuries to when the area was inhabited by indigenous Khoi and San people. Contributing to this history were the migrants that came from Europe and brought their food traditions. An example is a local pizzeria in Worcester, which links back to Italians who arrived in the 1950s. At the same time, others were brought to the valley as slaves, also bringing food traditions that have persisted. Another important driver is the economy. What happens at the national level, such as load shedding, trade deals, or economic crises, impacts local food systems. However, an increasingly impactful driver is climate change.
The aim of this project is really to understand the potential impacts of climate change on the food system of secondary cities in these three countries. There will be big challenges in terms of climate change and also maybe in terms of international markets. And so we want to get the actors of the food system ready for these challenges, to help them to anticipate these challenges. And for that, we need first to understand things on the ground, to understand how the food system is functioning.
For the study in the BVM, the research team focused on some specific value chains in the area. Starting with table grapes.
We thought this value chain was in particular interesting because the drivers could not only be climate change, but also what happens on the international market. So it's really a value chain which is, yes, profoundly rooted in the area, but also strongly connected to the international market and to international prices.
Another value chain the research team focused on was broiler chickens.
Chicken was selected because, of course, chicken can be eaten directly, so it's really chicken for consumption. And of course, it's animal protein, so it's very important for the nutrition status of the population. But chicken is also a source of income.
One of the actors in this value chain, and an important one both in the local BVM food system and the country more widely, is Rainbow Chicken. Wouter de Wet, the Sustainability Director at Rainbow Chicken, shed light on how they're responding to issues of sustainability in all its facets and climate change.
Our primary focus is we're a chicken business, so our purpose is to nourish the nation. We want to produce premium products, or we do produce premium products.
Rainbow Chicken isn't immune to challenges experienced elsewhere in the food system. Load shedding, issues around water supply, and failing infrastructure. To ensure they're less reliant on services while also reaching their sustainability goals and adding value to their business, Rainbow Chicken has needed to innovate. Wouter shared some of their inventions and circular economic approach.
We want to ensure that our operation is sustainable and in every single definition of sustainability, and at the same time in the communities where we operate to support the communities as much as possible. So what is our approach to waste to value? Ultimately, it is about trying to get to a point where we generate zero waste. And that is by absorbing as much as possible of the waste we do generate across this massive footprint of ours back into the value chain. We generate a lot of poultry litter. The majority of that poultry litter would then be composted and ultimately used as fertilizer in the agriculture sector as well. So when we talk about, specifically our wastewater solution, our circular economy approach to wastewater basically had a look in Worcester at what is the most viable, financially viable and effective way to impact wastewater. And we found that by utilizing a biological system, we definitely are a lot more effective in terms of treating the water and at the same time generating energy. If we just look at the numbers for 2023, this wastewater plant treated 800 megaliters of wastewater. And as I said, to a better standard than what we've done ever before, and basically converted 8,500 tons of nutrients into biogas. And that biogas basically then generated 7,500 megawatt hours of electricity.
Rainbow Chicken isn't the only actor in this value chain that's implementing a circular economic approach. Nolutando Didiza, a master's student at the University of the Western Cape and a member of the CoE-FS team, has uncovered similar practices elsewhere in the food system.
My topic is bio-waste valorization, and I'm using the waste-to-energy value plant here in Worcester as a case study. There's two sections actually. There's the bioenergy sector, and then there's the informal practice of chicken spent layers. I actually found out that, well, the community of Zwelithemba and Worcester, they're actually practicing circular economy without even knowing that they are practicing that. They started telling me how they're raising the chickens, and then how after the life of the chickens is up, and then they take the same chicken for meat consumption. The waste we take, we put it there as a chicken manure, and then it becomes a fertilizer, and then we compost it. So I was like, okay, that's interesting, because the same process that they're practicing is the same process that is done by the waste-to-value energy plant.
So there's the table grape industry and the broiler chicken value chain. But what about the other important value chains in the Breede Valley?
I noticed when going through the agriculture census that the Breede Valley is one of South Africa's largest producers of butternuts. And this surprised me. I hadn't realized that, and started trying to do more research around that. Now, butternut is a very interesting crop for us to research.
The guys growing butternuts usually are wine farmers or stone fruit farmers who have a piece of ground lying fallow, which is they can plant it in a year or two's time, so that they can then catch a crop, at least in the interim. A third of the butternuts that we get in are exported, probably. A third go for the local market, the municipal markets. And then the other third is split up between the hawkers and the pre-packers. So from January through to May, you can export, mainly EU and UK markets. Thereafter, Spain comes in, and then it's not viable to export anymore. The South African market peaks in winter for butternuts, sales of butternuts. We have a very big market with hawkers, very big. There's some guys come from Cape Town, they'll come and buy a link at a time. So that's a good market. The biggest advantage of butternuts for the local market and the street market, the street hawkers, is that it's a self-contained unit. It's hard. It can be stored for months. We're going to be storing from January through to September. You've got a long storage period. You can put it outside if you want to. You can put it on a roof. You see people with pumpkins on the roof and all kinds of cucurbits. For the value for money aspect is that it's a lot better value than most of the other vegetables on the market.
In addition to their focus on specific value chains, the Urban Fosk team also considered ways in which to build a more sustainable food system. Reflecting on the originality of the research, CRAD noted a few factors. A social science approach, as opposed to a focus purely on technical innovations. Learning from the resilience building practices to climate change already implemented or underway in the BVM, and a place-based approach.
So this place-based approach, I think this is also something quite original, and we implemented this not only among researchers, but with people in neighborhoods of the city, with the staff of the municipality. So it was really, I would say, multi-stakeholder, a kind of co-construction of the research findings.
A learning journey is a methodology that is often used in facilitated dialogue, and that means in workshop processes or learning processes where groups of people for a moment in time are taken out of their current environment, a workshop room, even their offices, into an experience with the issue that they're engaging, hosted by people directly affected by that issue. We would essentially convene a group that have interest in that particular question, from government to the farmers, to new beneficiaries, to different stakeholders, bring them into a process where they are able to let go some of their preconceptions, essentially commit to listening, commit to putting aside perhaps some of their very strong views, and then embark on a visit, sometimes a walkabout, it could be called that, to see farms, to talk to people, to empathize, and then to retreat out of that into conversations that are carefully facilitated to see whether a new understanding can in fact help us unlock some of the challenges that emerged. So the learning journey seems to be an event. It takes place over 1 or 2 or 3 days.
Bringing people into spaces that they normally don't visit is a really great icebreaker, because you already sort of shift the power dynamic. I would argue that everybody is pushed to kind of to cross their own boundaries. If I'm the food vendor, I can tell you what the problems are, and I can point to you, this is what we've done, and I can show you evidence. So you can talk to me about your academic research, but I'm going to tell you what's actually happening on the ground. So I feel like that definitely helped.
The learning journeys were actually incredible. I attended 2, where there was Mr. Lowe producing beautiful food in his garden just there in Parker Street. And although he's doing it for himself, he's also providing food to his neighbors, and he might even be selling some of it, to the vendor who's sitting on the street selling, perhaps going to the farm, getting crates of potatoes or crates of nachis that are not going to go to market, 3rd grade or reject, eitgooi, and sorting it, taking out the rotten things, putting it into packets and selling those little packets at very affordable prices. We were given, I think, an allocation of, I don't know, what, 20 Rand or something, and we had to go and buy lunch for ourselves, because they said they're not going to cater. So that was a beautiful way of bringing it home. That if you don't have a lot of money and you want to eat, how are you going to do it? And by far the cheapest was going to the hawker. The Zwelathemba journey was equally as interesting, and it was shocking to see the little help required to give creches tenureship of the piece of land on which they've been based, especially in the informal areas. So they can't apply for an electricity point, or they struggle to provide, there's no water, they can't really get funding. There's so many blockages to their advancement, and they're doing such an incredible work in the community, looking after children whose parents have to go out and work on the farms.
Along with informal and formal traders, small-scale farmers and local, provincial and national government representatives, the Urban FOSC team also gave particular focus to an integral part of the local food system, the early childhood development sector. Shocks to the food system, such as those arising from climate change, can quickly result in negative outcomes for the most vulnerable and for children in particular. ECD learning centers can serve as an important buffer through the care that they offer, as well as the meals that they provide. Brenda Siko is the principal at Zwelathemba Care Center, an early childhood development learning center in Zwelathemba. As one of the stakeholders engaged during the learning journeys, Brenda shared some of the challenges faced when running an ECD center in an informal settlement where residents earn low wages, land for community gardens is scarce, zoning is an issue, and child malnutrition indicators are worryingly high.
In the case I'm having 20 now, 20 children. In our area, most of the parents are working seasonally. So, on seasonally, these parents are at the farms. There is no ECD, there's nothing, there's nobody looking after these children. They started it as an NPO 2014, but till today, I'm still not registered because of requirements from the Department of Education. The area itself, it is not zoned. For instance, when I applied for registration for social development, they asked I must have a zoning certificate. I must have a building plan. I must have a lease agreement. Just to mention the few, and the most important one, the fire clearance certificate. And then I did go to fire department, and the lady came, the inspector, and said, unfortunately, Caesar, your crash is a shack, your structure is a shack. We cannot give you fire clearance because it's a high risk. Sometimes we struggle to get the parents, they don't want to pay. They don't have money. Most people that we are working with is the people that are working in farms. So they work seasonally. So they take their children out of the crash because they don't have the money to pay. You know what made me cry one day? I was sitting there, my children, they didn't come to the school, and the parents told me, we don't have money to pay. They called me Miss. Miss, you don't have money to pay. So the children, they know the time for the lunch. Guess what? They were standing there in the gate, hungry. What must I do as a parent? Those children are standing there and they are hungry. And they are calling me, Miss, that means, Miss, can you please give us food? I have a small space. I like to watch reality shows, all those things, the home channel. That's where they taught us. I saw another lady who's living in the flats. She used the tires to plant. I said, let me try this, because there's no money to buy veg. So I used those tires. That's when I get spinach. That's where I get, the spinach is easy to grow. And our children like moro.
Regular stakeholder engagement processes, such as the learning journeys or the municipality's engagements with its constituency, offer opportunities for citizens like Brenda to have their voice heard, but only if those governing are willing to listen.
We found that a lot of wards, a lot of community members would place the request on the municipality's table to really assess how we utilize vacant land throughout our municipal area, and how that could then probably be repurposed for things such as community food gardens. And we've really taken the call of the community in this regard to an extent where we have completed a land audit, just to give us a sense of what is available.
The work of resident and community activist Andries September showcases the kind of opportunities that exist when vacant land is used for public good.
I make it my duty to gardening because I enjoy it. It gives me more energy and I relax. When I inspire the community, also to have home gardening. You get away from buying, you got food on the table, and also helping others, and inspiring them also. But it's nice to see when people are in need, you can also assist them to have something on their table.
Collaborative efforts in and between communities with government, business and civil society is required to address immediate socio-economic and infrastructure challenges. And it's urgently needed to tackle climate change, which affects every aspect of the food system, from agricultural productivity to socio-economic stability, through its impacts on temperature, precipitation, and extreme weather. While climate change is acknowledged, in general, there is a common perception among farmers that, owing to their water-efficient irrigation technologies, they can cope with drought episodes. Erratic weather patterns such as untimely, out-of-season rains are more concerning, but climate change is not yet perceived as a threat to their farming activities. This encourages unsustainable use of natural resources during heat waves, like resorting to unaccounted use of groundwater.
We've found basically three main ideas, I would say, about it. The first thing is that it gives the feeling that farmers in Worcester very much associated the climate change, initially at least, with drought. The second thing is that there have been a lot of improvement in water use.
In recent couple of decades, there's been a lot of advancement in terms of irrigation technology. Farmers are much cleverer with how they use water. They can do a tremendous amount of agriculture with relatively little water by using drip irrigation and other things.
Farmers in the second round of interviews were much more inclined to look at, irregularities provided by climate change, not only drought, but also, the irregularity in the rain patterns.
I can use last year as an example, 2023 harvest. We had massive rainfall sections within harvest period. And unfortunately, that didn't do well for grapes that were still hanging within the vineyard, because that opened up a whole Pandora's box for different bacteria and fungi. There were two floods. The first flood was in winter, the second flood was in spring. And by that time, we've already had some of the vines that went through bud burst. And the difficult thing about that is the soils, because of the floods, the soils were completely saturated. And that also opens up a bunch of opportunities for fungi and bacteria. In the long term, we do look at climate change. Hopefully, producers are seeing it as climate change, but every season has its own challenge. And I'm hoping that they don't see it as a seasonal challenge and that they're actually seeing it as climate change.
The research team identified the types of strategies farmers in the BVM are using as a way of adapting to the impact of climate change.
So I would say two different lines of adaptations. One would be, let's try to master the nature. And another one which is more about adaptations in the way that, there's not so much we can do about it. Instead of, losing once in a while heavily, let's plan more carefully where we grow crops. So I would say this is the two kind of strategies that we've heard about.
Researchers were also interested in how local government was responding to climate change.
In the case of my work with the municipality, climate change is something they acknowledge. In the Integrated Development Plan, the IDP plan, this is the 5-year strategic plan of the municipality.
So ours is really how we can, considering specifically the climate change agendas and what is transpiring within that specific subject matter, how we can mitigate the impacts of climate change, how we can plan, therefore, how we can preempt and, proactively identify what we as a municipality can do to soften the impact of climate change, particularly on our agricultural sector. One of the key actions that we've identified from a water scarcity perspective is to obviously protect our water source and to consider how we can augment that water source to ensure that we not only secure water for our residents, but also for our agricultural stakeholders and sector. So we have a feeder dam, the Steynskloof Dam, which primarily services the areas of Worcester and Rossenville, particularly the agricultural sector as well. And BVM has identified raising that dam wall as one of its key strategic initiatives for the long term, as it also unlocks opportunities of alternative energy. So we can look at issues of hydroelectrical generation that could unlock an alternative energy source for Breede Valley Municipality. But what we've noted was obviously our summers tend to get much warmer than before, much more localized veld fires that we need to respond to within the fire season. That also presents significant risk to crops and particularly farms. And then in the winter, we've also noticed much higher rainfall patterns that obviously brought about many localized incidents of localized floodings. Maybe just interestingly to mention, and in conclusion to this point, we have through the Joint District and Metro approach established a Breede Valley flooding task team, which specifically looks at flooding incidents in hotspot areas, and in this case the hotspot areas identified was Stonesriver as well as the Dorrans and also Rossenville. Again, we recognize that we are not the key drivers of support when it comes to agriculture. But we have the role to play. It still occurs on our doorstep, and we cannot just raise our hands and say that we can't do anything or provide any support. So in collaboration with the Provincial Department of Local Government, the Provincial Department of Agriculture, Breede Valley Municipality, we've identified the hydroponic garden as a key pilot project to test whether this concept would work.
The project basically started in 2021. How it got started was, it was a combination of knowledge pele combining with the local trust. We had 4 greenhouses that we managed from the start. Yes. What we do is we currently produce lettuce and also spinach. We use hydroponics to grow our produce. So basically we just use water and we add the nutrients to the water, and we reuse and recycle the water all the time. We immediately saw the impact. It means a lot to us, myself also, because I was unemployed, actually retrenched before I started at the farm. So it definitely generated an income for us, and it definitely helps us, not just us as persons or as people, but also our households.
In the context of climate change, adaptation, innovation, and collaboration are key to building resilient food systems.
I think we must also realize that we need to do things differently. We need to use less water. We need to farm with less land, but we must become more efficient. We must apply technologies. We must also solidify other partnerships. We must learn from the best people in the world.
Findings from the Urban Fosk project have provided insights into the Breede Valley's strengths, vulnerabilities, and responses to food security issues under a changing climate. Using a territorial food system approach that promotes comprehensive, locally rooted, cross-sectoral solutions, the study has revealed that the region's food system is dynamic and internationally competitive, but marked by significant disparities. These are just some of the findings thus far.
We wanted at the end of this study to emphasize the need to think a little bit about the future, and so to encourage people to do collective actions for the adaptation of the food system to climate change. So it's a kind of shift of mindset. We had also with these stakeholders a discussion about their strategies, and the finding was that diversification was absolutely key in their strategies. And actually they already do a great job. For instance, for the table grape industry, the farmers told us that they are trying to actually think about different or alternatives for exporting or for selling their produce. Because if plan A doesn't work, they have the plan B and the plan C, etc. So this thinking is exactly resilience.
We met with members from the Zwelathemba community, and something interesting that was said around climate change is that they were saying, I hope we can be made more aware of climate change in real time. I hope that we can be made more aware of torrential rains coming, flooding coming in advance, so that we can prepare ourselves. We don't want to be caught by surprise.
When we started this research back in 2019, one of the things that the officials from the Breede Valley Municipality said that they are concerned about is that foods are grown in the Breede Valley, transported to the Epping Market in Cape Town, bought at the Epping Market by traders and brought back to Worcester. They said one of the things that there's a lot of interest in Worcester is the idea of a fresh produce market.
I think that a local market would be a good idea. We had the municipal market in Worcester many years ago, but they all come apart because the volume isn't there, the volume of fruit isn't there, the volume of trade isn't there. Then it'd be a one-stop shop. But because there is no market, people buy in Cape Town, they buy from the wholesalers and they sell on the street again. The market would have to be up and running before anybody would invest the money and time and effort into producing for the market specifically.
As this iteration of the project draws to a close, what are their reflections on their time in the Breede Valley? And importantly, what has been the experience of those living and working in the area?
I don't think that this project's going to end when this particular round of funding comes to an end. And I'm hoping that we will continue to collaborate with the local authorities and with the stakeholders in the Breede Valley Municipality for some time to come.
So this is what I've learned over the past few years, that there's a lot of activity and a lot of resilience from communities here. They're not negative, they're very positive about the future of their space, their territory, and they want to take ownership of this space. There just needs to be more collaboration with all role players from provincial, national, and local government.
I want to change the way we do things in the informal settlement. So we must grow our own small vegetables gardens. For instance, if the carrots is there, the spinach is there, morojo is there. If the little bit of pumpkin is there, small beetroot, these foods that are having the vitamins, the carbohydrates, all those things, is going to be useful for our children.
The analytical and the statistical value that we have received from those type of studies, it really opened our eyes from a planning perspective.
If we have a more inclusive approach, it will take a little bit of time, but agriculture can also serve households and maybe serve other interests in our society that is not necessarily market-oriented. And maybe we must go back to the drawing boards and to say to ourselves, how can we design a system that's inclusive, that's empowering, and it also can make economic sense.
The wonderful thing about working with the Urban FOSC project and the Centre of Excellence is the long-term commitment and relationship with Worcester and the Worcester municipality. So this was set up in a way that was very clearly intended not to be extractive research. It was intended to leave a legacy and to show the commitment, the long-term commitment of the UWC team.
I think this program that CIRA did and the University of Western Cape and with their partners is very important in terms of exposing, not exposing in a negative way, but you know, enabling us to understand the differences between people that have the means to produce, the farmers and the agriculture that are driving an economy which is really important in terms of job creation, and the people that then go and work there, whether it's permanent or seasonal workers, and then how it feeds down into their family in terms of income, but also more so that they have access to food, and us as a community have access to food. The Breede Valley is incredibly fortunate to have been selected for the study. So we were very fortunate to have all this energy and all these minds, these brilliant professors and academics to come and help us as a community. I really, really, really hope and pray that this doesn't just land up in some sort of academic published paper conference and everybody sits there looking at the guinea pig, but nothing is done to address the challenges. And here one talks to not just the academic side, but also the political side, because decision makers can make a decision.